Good afternoon, everyone. I know it's after lunch, but good afternoon, everyone. Hey. So we are going to be joined by Krista, who is calling in from the States. Here she is. Hi, Krista. How are you?
I'm so good. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. So, Krista, I have to say I'm incredibly excited about this talk today because I love sustainable success and high performers, and you are just that. But on top of that, you've got an incredible story of your 20-year tenure with Verizon. And so even earlier today, you had a lot of conversations about inclusion, diversity, but also conversations about retention. So we saw 2020, we had the Great Resignation. 2021, we had the Great Exhaustion. Unfortunately, we've seen the great tech redundancies in 2023. So you being the COO of Verizon, it'd be incredible to hear your story, particularly about your loyalty to Verizon and how they fostered that in you, and potentially things that people can learn to also foster loyalty within their organization and retain talent during these tumultuous times.
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and I was listening to the previous panel, and it's a lot of what was discussed. I have been very fortunate to be a part of an organization where the leaders within the organization really did take action on the culture. I think it's important that companies express what they believe and what they want for employees and for their culture. And then you can, as an employee, you can measure that through action. For me, I was invited to ask questions. I was embraced for what I knew. I was encouraged for my potential. I was leveraged as a member of my community and the value that I can bring to our services. So I was groomed. I also put in the effort. I put myself out there. I was willing to lean in, but we had companies and we had a culture that was willing to embrace me and help me influence the organization at the same time.
Awesome. So what I'm hearing is the level of entrepreneurship, you taking ownership of your own career, but actually having an organization that not only asks questions, but listen for the response to put in action. And I think that's
100%. And there's an expectation that's part of it that I think is really important. You have to have an expectation that this is what the actions should be about.
Could you elaborate on that a bit further? Because we often hear people conduct culture inquiries, get the information. We hear a lot of conversation about data, but we all know that data can paint a story in which we choose to paint. So could you elaborate a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Yeah, so let me give it to you from a fundamental standpoint. First, development is ongoing and it happens all the time. So we measure development. We measure hours per employee. We measure types of development that our employees get. The second piece is we measure, and the previous panelists spoke about it, we measure various diversity stats. We measure hiring rates, we measure stick rates, we measure pulse engagement scores, we measure engagement standards in terms of how often we're in person with employees versus when we're virtual. We have a whole group of expectations about being visible. I have the benefit of having a fleet of stores across the country. And I'll tell you, in the States, there's a show called Undercover Boss. And we kind of make the joke that you should never be able to be an undercover boss. You should be so present and so visible and so accessible that, your employees feel like they know you. And so we have a set of measurements around engagement standards that allows us to stay in front of the opportunities with our workforce and learn from them what they need.
That is beautiful. I'm familiar with Undercover Boss, and I love the fact that you have that ethos and you speak about it so openly. In terms of that level of employee engagement, what practical things do you think other organizations can learn from what you do at Verizon in terms of that level of engagement throughout these times?
Well, number one, engagement, it takes an investment of time. It also takes an investment of skill. Not everyone, what we learned, I will tell you, coming through the pandemic or coming through some of the civil unrest that we had, we were very quickly reminded that our leaders are humans. And we had a corporate culture, I think, overall that said, let people have their space. We don't talk about certain topics. We just kind of, keep it a bit more contained. What we've learned is to really empower our leaders to make room for of those conversations. So I think you really have to be practical in thinking about what seat is your leader in, and do they feel empowered to actually create a culture of inclusivity. And for us, it was about giving them permission to be a listener, giving them permission to not solve everything, giving them permission to not be superhuman. It's okay, it's enough to be human in this business. And really giving them those tools as a leader so that they came to those challenging moments as a human and really well equipped to be empathetic, but also sometimes just a confidant.
I really appreciate that. I've got a soft spot for leadership. I think they manage up, they manage down, and over the last few years, they've had to now take on this new mantle of being like unofficial mental health first aiders, or in some cases, official mental health first aiders. So for yourself as someone in leadership, it'd be great to understand more about how you position yourself over the last few years to really foster that level of engagement, but also continue managing those high-performing teams despite what we've seen from the pandemic, the hybrid working, and this whole paradigm shift.
Yeah. So I think that my journey has been one of almost redefining engagement. I grew up in a time where, the longer you work, the more hours you put in, the more engaged you must be. And that is just not so. So I think first and foremost, some of what I do is I really expect calendar discipline from my teams, and I model that. Modeling calendar discipline does more than just help your team not burn out. It really empowers people to learn. It demonstrates trust. It really fosters collaboration, not just within all work groups cross-functionally, but right within small teams. I have the great benefit of having teams where you might have one of 5 that do the same job. I only need one on the call, maybe. I only need one in the meeting. And then we got to trust each other to really share the information and compete as a team. So I think one of my points of engagement is the calendar is full of invitations, not mandates. And being able to really foster an environment where it's okay to have decisions and make choices on where you're going to spend your time, I think definitely has a ripple effect in many other areas. The second thing that I role model in my time is there are some roles and there are some reasons that you should have your work email on your phone. Maybe it's your work phone and you're required to have the two. But how you manage that is important. We are not required to have email on our phone. We have it on our tablets. We have it on our phone if we want. We have it on our laptop. So one of the things I do is I publicly share with people that I do not keep it on my phone. And the reason is so that I am less likely to infringe on your personal time just because it's convenient to me. And that role models a different way of working, and it allows our teams the space to plan and sequence accordingly. And it helps you as a leader control yourself, because sometimes we have the best intent, but our actions created a whole nother level of feelings for our workforce. And then the third thing that I'll share on engagement, and it goes back to time as well, is think about what time of day you ask questions and set meetings that have certain requirements. The worst thing to do is to tell your workforce, please take your Sundays to yourself, have your weekend, and then schedule a 7:30 or 8 a.m. meeting that requires some level of research about what happened on Friday. It just doesn't, it's not logical. So as leaders, we've got to think about, do our actions align with our words, and are there things that we can do that model good behaviors and have bigger outcomes like trust, collaboration, teamwork, and helps us to avoid burnout, which is the number one way to really drive engagement. Who wants to be burnt out on purpose?
Absolutely. And I am a bit biased. I'm obsessed with burnout prevention, recovery, and all sorts. So it's really great to hear, because there's a theme here of empowerment. And what I'm hearing you say is that you're giving people back their power, which is often the first thing they lose when they start to go onto that slippery slope of burnout. And managing time, because oftentimes that's the most tangible thing we can manage within the workplace, our calendars, definitely is a gateway into doing so. Part of my bias is I love the way that lifestyle helps people to achieve sustainable success, because we know a lot of incredible people who thrive under pressure. But thriving under pressure in the workplace when it's productive and constructive is not the same thing as living a high-stress lifestyle. And for someone like yourself who's had this incredible career, who not only has this leadership role within Verizon, but you also do so many altruistic activities and engagement in the wider community. It'd be great to know more about the lifestyle you've built to enable you to achieve that sustainable success, show up for yourself, but still show up for others.
Well, it's a great question, and I'm a mother of two. I'm married, so we've got a lot going on in our life over my career. My kids are grown now, so feel good about that. But I'm still happily married, so there's a lot of balance that has to occur. What I've learned over my 24 years is that balance is achieved over a lifetime. What you need at certain periods of your time in work or at home will be different. And so I try to create realistic systems around me that reflect the moment I'm in today based on what my family unit and I need. I think of my career as a family unit. Every move I've made has been one that we've discussed as a family because I get to go to the clubhouse, if you will. They almost have to start over somewhere else. So I've learned to really make sure that they're part of that discussion. The other thing is I use my calendar. That's why I keep coming back to it. Time is my most precious asset. It's the thing I own, I control. It's mine. It's free. It's also what I can charge others for. So my time matters. And so my calendar is important. I try not to overcommit. And I try to make sure I shift priorities based on impact, not based on other people's expectations. All of that comes with discipline over time. I think it's also really important that you use your productivity tools. I believe in all of the productivity tools, whether it's Slack or shared documents. I think these things save a tremendous amount of time. So for me, it's about engaging my family and making sure that they become a priority in the decisions that I make. Accepting balance comes over time, making sure that I'm using all of the tools available and that my day starts and ends with a review of my calendar. Because if my calendar doesn't reflect my priorities, then I have completely mismanaged the moment. And that is something that I can do for myself every day. So I encourage people to think about it that way.
That's incredible. I want everyone in the room to just really hear that it starts with your time management. I think sometimes we get so caught up in the day and we lose our agency and autonomy simply because we're actually not managing the one thing that we genuinely can. And you've said it time and time again, and it's the calendar management. So if there's a takeaway, just even in this moment that everyone can have, learn to take back your personal power of managing your calendar, because that's what I'm really hearing. And I wanted to say thank you for being so candid and so open, because we sometimes hear, we've had conversations about gender and disparities and so forth, but sometimes we hear that women in executive positions, they can't, quote unquote, have it all. But the fact that you were so honest and candid by saying, actually, mother of two, children are grown and still happily married, there were a lot of chuckles in the room. I'm not sure if you heard it or not, but there's a few smiles and chuckles in the room. So thank you for being so candid about that. What I'd like to ask you in the last remaining minutes is, what can other leaders do to help foster that sense of loyalty, foster that sense of engagement in the new buzzword, psychological safety? How do they start creating that level of psychological safety so that not only are they just retaining talent, but they're actually retaining diverse talent within their organization?
Yeah, so I love that question. Number one, I think you have a responsibility as a leader now more than ever to be servant. I just don't think that the workforce and the incoming employees that we need are interested in being dictated or having an authority over them. What they want is to be a part of something, and everyone has a role to play. I often open moments and I say, titles don't define people, they define scopes of responsibility. So this is my responsibility, you have a responsibility, but people to people, professional to professional, we're the same in that regard. And so I think if you can level set with your workforce and understand your title represents your scope, not who you are as a person, I think it's very powerful. It will lead to what is the second thing, and that is be relatable. Being relatable doesn't mean you have everyone's shared experience, but it means you're curious about their experience. There's so much to learn in a conversation with another person, and there's so much to share. As a diverse leader, as a diverse person, I often remind people that I don't think it's my responsibility to teach people about diversity, but there is sometimes my opportunity in front of me to do that very thing. And I love that moment, but that's a leadership moment that you have to seize. And then the final thing I would just say is be an active listener. There is a legitimate difference between listening and waiting for your turn to talk. And I think the more experienced you are as a leader, the more executive you become, the stories almost start to feel repetitive. The scenarios start to play themselves out over and over again. But you know what? The person might be different. There might be a subtle nuance that's different. And the way you pick that up, demonstrate respect for your employee, and really seize the moment is to be an active listener. So that's what I would encourage leaders today to think about.
I love that, particularly your last point about active listeners. I had a conversation with someone just in the breakout, and they're talking about the bias in sometimes how we ask questions, because hopefully we're looking for a particular response. But actually, if we actively listen, then we can respond to what's being said to us as opposed to what we're formulating in our head. So thank you very much for sharing that. Love that. We do have some Slido questions. I'm not sure you're going to be able to see them, but I'll read it out to you. So we hear that taking regular holidays helps avoid burnouts, but email build-up can be painful. Yes, it can. How can employers encourage a culture where this doesn't happen?
Well, so I love that question, and it takes time for the most part, right? Because people have to get used to this. But a couple of things: A, how you plan for your vacay. So the same way, like if I'm a parent, so I planned all kinds of childcare and other kinds of things in advance. I think it's important to do that for vacation. Let people know well in advance that you're not going to be there. And so in that time that I'm gone, is there something that you're going to need? Is there something time sensitive? Asking those questions as part of your prep can help you. The other part to ask is the week after I get back, is there anything you're going to need? That's going to be a high priority because you may want to pull that work forward. You might have otherwise in a normal BAU environment left that, for the Friday before. But because you're going to be on vacation, you might do some prep work ahead of time. But that requires you, again, to plan accordingly. So ask ahead of time when you're out what might be due or expected, and when you come back that first week, what's going to be important. The last thing, again, clear your calendar. It drives me crazy when people come back from vacation to a full calendar. Depending on the role you're in, I don't know how well that works out for you. You've got to put some time on that calendar to return to work. And that means clear through emails. That means return some phone calls. It means walking the hallways and saying hello.
Yeah, pretty much. And I think it's really important that you've come back to that time management again, because it's the best way to retain your personal power, the best way to make sure that you prevent burnout. And it's interesting because a lot of people think, as soon as I start working at 9 a.m., that's when I'm available. Whereas actually, no, maybe you can block some time at the beginning of your day to organize yourself so no one actually can book meetings with you before 9:30. I mean, really, who needs to speak to us before 10 a.m., let's be honest? Not me.
Exactly. Exactly. That's exactly the plan. You got to plan for that. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for being so candid and honest throughout this entire conversation. And that whole time management thing resonates with me so much, especially having to manage my own time. I'm like, But in terms of final words, for everyone in the room today, what is the one thing that you'd really like them to take hold of to retain that personal power, to achieve those professional aspirations without sacrificing their personal health and vitality along the way? What is one thing you can say to them?
I would just remind everybody that where you show up, how you show up, when you show up, says everything about what's important to you, who you are, and what people can expect from you. And you are a role model, period. And your role model comes through first in your actions.
I love that. It's kind of a segue to personal branding in the professional world and that entrepreneurship. But I want to say thank you ever so much, because I could go down that road, but we don't have enough time. But honestly, Krista, it's been an absolute pleasure. I think your whole career journey has been incredible. I think that level of loyalty is just outstanding in the world that we see today. People are sort of switching off, but you've definitely switched in, stepped up, and now you're paving the way for the next generation. And actually, we've got 20 seconds. We've talked about Gen Z earlier, and they are a force to be reckoned with. In the last 20 seconds, what would you say about bringing Gen Z into the workplace?
Oh, get ready. I don't even know what to say. They are so opinionated. I will tell you, they are way more informed, so get ready.
Thank you ever so much, Krista. Having a wonderful day.
Have a good one, everyone.